Welcome to the Michigan Works Association conference. It's been going really well, and it's going well because we have some brilliant presenters all day long for every day, and Ryan and Carl are part of that group. So thank you, Ryan and Carl, for taking the time. So a little bit of housekeeping. So we talked a little bit earlier. Ryan is going to do a presentation, and then we're going to take any questions at the end of that. And if you want to jump on, you can just try to share your screen, and I will, bring you right in here so you can live chat with us. His is going to be a little bit more fluid, so you can jump in and out with your Q&A as we go along. And just use the chat, because even though I'm going to leave the stage, I'll be right here listening and watching and making sure if you need some tech support, we'll try to get that on board for you. The survey is at the top along with some Twitter handles. I'll put the survey again at the bottom when we finish. Please take the time to give some feedback. I know our presenters always like to understand, what did they do? What can they do differently? And sometimes you might even say, hey, I want to hear more of this. And then the association can schedule a webinar in the future that we can bring you guys all back together to cover that topic a little bit more in depth. So as we talked a little bit, if we're bigger, just double click on it. So when Ryan shares his strategic plan, double click on it and it will fill it up, and you'll see us on the bottom as a film strip, and then just double click again to get back. So I'd like to give a big shout out of thanks to Michigan Works Northeast Consortium. They're sponsoring today's workshop. And our sponsors make the world go round. We really appreciate them. So thank you so much. Make sure you visit the exhibitors when you can. Try to video chat with somebody, and just make good use of that chat if you want to have some interaction with us, and then we will go forward from there. So now I'd like to turn it over to Ryan and Carl. I'll let you do your introductions and be able to move along. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Luann, and thanks everybody who's joined thus far for our workshop on enabling economic opportunity. For some updates from the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. Great to be here on the third day of the 2020 Michigan Works Annual Conference in a new format, but from everything I've heard, things seem to be going very well so far in this virtual environment. So thanks for sticking around. My name is Ryan Hundt. I'm a regional director with the Michigan Economic Development Corporation on our growth and development team. And also joining me today, I'll let Carl introduce himself, and then we can jump into the presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan, and good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us. My name is Carl Dean. I'm a Senior Strategic Advisor for the MEDC. I work within the Business Development Projects area of MEDC. I lead some of our larger complex projects around the state, as well as participate in implementation of strategy and development of strategy on different internal and external initiatives. So looking forward to talking to you today. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Carl. And we'll get started here. So again, the first portion of our presentation today, we'll be talking through our new strategic plan, our 5-year strategic plan from 2020 through 2025 that we just implemented beginning last fall. A few takeaways from today's presentation. First and foremost, we'll do an overview of the new 5-year strategic plan and some of the inputs and resources that we had go into the construction and the build out of that strategic plan. Carl will then take a deeper dive into the evaluation criteria that we are now using for business expansion and attraction projects. And then, of course, we'll touch on some of our ongoing partnerships with both the Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity, as well as Michigan Works. Before we begin talking about the what and the how, I think it's important to ask the question why. Why was a new strategic plan needed for statewide economic development? Now, obviously, COVID-19 has wreaked unprecedented havoc on our economy, not just in Michigan, but really across the entire country. Thinking back, I know it takes a lot of brainpower to think pre-pandemic, but before COVID-19, over the last decade, Michigan has experienced positive economic growth and an improved business climate. This year alone, Michigan ranked as one of the top states for doing business, according to Area Development Magazine. We also captured 8 of the top 10 spots in Business Facilities' 16th annual rankings report for 2020, including the #1 ranking for the automotive manufacturing strength category. But as any good coach will tell you, whether it's football, basketball, baseball, what have you, we can't simply rest on our laurels. We need to keep moving forward. And our research shows us that Michigan is still susceptible to cyclical economic trends, and we are also overexposed to certain factors like automation, especially in the automotive industry. Additionally, the benefits of economic growth in our state, they have not been experienced by all Michiganders in every corner of the state. As a result, our findings show that our statewide economic development strategy should focus more on high-impact economic development by enabling long-term economic opportunity and equitable pathways toward high-wage growth. And we're going to talk a little more on the how moving forward. How did we reach these conclusions, and what factors did we use as data inputs to lead us down this path? Now, in preparation for our strategic planning cycle that kicked off in 2019, our organization identified 5 key questions that needed to be answered in order to craft an effective strategic plan. Question number 1 was, how does the MEDC in Michigan as a whole compare to other states? Then, how have the MEDC's flagship programs performed historically, and how is that assistance currently distributed? And when we say flagship programs, we really are talking specifically about programs like the Business Development Program, Pure Michigan, and some of our community development programs. The third question is, what major trends should the MEDC consider? Question number 4 was, what happens if the economy slows down? Now, this question was first addressed by a work group dealing with recession scenario planning, and that really laid the groundwork for some of our efforts on dealing with the economic crisis caused by COVID-19 that nobody saw coming. And then lastly, what industries should the MEDC focus on, and how healthy is the automotive industry in particular here in Michigan? Now, we answered these questions in a number of different ways. We commissioned with external consultants to conduct both primary and secondary research on these topics. We also conducted similar internal studies through our strategy and policy team to make sure that these findings were aligned. We also collaborated with economic development partners to gather their feedback. And lastly, we conducted cross-functional internal projects to help develop some contingency plans like the recession scenario planning work group. Now we start to get into the what. What were the findings, and what exactly does the new 5-year strategic plan hope to accomplish? The first set of findings really should come as no surprise to anybody who's been around workforce and economic development for a number of years, even if they're relatively new in the profession. Michigan is 49th out of 50 states when it comes to growth during a recession. Part of this is due to an over-reliance on the automotive industry, which we saw crippled during the recession in 2008 and 2009. And with a significant concentration of automotive activities in Michigan, we're also overexposed to automation risk. And while there are opportunities in high-wage job growth as a result of automation, this could also mean job losses as well if we don't focus more heavily on upskilling and training for our workforce. As a result of these findings, our first guiding principle is sustainable long-term growth focused on economic resiliency that can weather the storm of economic downturns and automation risk. The second set of findings deals with regional impact. And while we like to talk about statewide economic growth through our strategic plan, the reality is that there are certain regions of the state that grow at a much faster rate than others, and that growth is not always evenly distributed. And really what makes these inequities so frustrating from an economic return on investment perspective is the growing evidence showing that investing in geographically disadvantaged areas actually leads to a higher ROI, which helps reinforce the need to support companies, communities, and individuals in these areas. So our second guiding principle highlights the importance of regional impact, empowering and supporting every corner of the state to help improve economic outcomes. One data point that is of particular concern, and it was a trend that dates back to pre-COVID, but really has been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic, is the sizable percentage of Michigan households that fall below the ALICE threshold, which I'm sure many of you know stands for asset limited, income constrained employed. What this really means is that too many Michiganders struggle to provide the basic necessities for themselves and their families, such as housing, childcare, food, transportation, etc. And there's very little to almost nothing left over when it comes to savings and long-term economic sustainability for those families. In 2010, the percentage of households beneath the ALICE threshold in Michigan was 41%. By 2017, that number has not improved. It's actually gotten slightly worse. It now stands at around 43% of Michigan households below the ALICE threshold. In order to reverse this trend, our strategic plan focuses on the third guiding principle of equitable high wage growth, ideally working closely with private sector employers who are not only concerned about their bottom line, but also how they can be good corporate citizens by doing simple things like providing a livable wage and offering career pathways for their workforce. Last but certainly not least is our ongoing commitment to customer focus as the fourth and final guiding principle. My boss always says that everyone that we interact with is our customer, whether it's a company, a local economic development organization, our workforce development partners at the various Michigan works agencies across the state, even somebody who may stumble upon our website looking for help in finding a job. Every single person that we interact with is a customer. And when we have that mentality, we can maintain a laser focus on the other guiding principles you see here on the slide. Now, using these guiding principles as a sort of North Star for the organization, we were able to build out the remaining elements of our strategic plan, starting with a new mission and vision that you can see on the screen, along with 5 strategic focus areas that speak to the core functions of the MEDC. And I'm going to spend most of the time on this slide walking through these 5 focus areas. First, we are committed to working aggressively to attract, retain, and support businesses, particularly ones in our targeted industries that we will review in the next slide. And this is done in order to support jobs, wage growth, and investment in Michigan. This is really the bread and butter of economic development as a whole, and our success largely depends on both internal staff, such as our business development managers, which many of you work with on a daily basis, as well as key partnerships with external stakeholders like our good friends within the Michigan work system. This is perhaps the best way to secure competitive business growth opportunities and This is the best way to secure competitive business growth opportunities by showing clients the value of our partnerships and the resources we can bring to the table in a cohesive fashion. One way we can help attract, retain, and support businesses is by fostering high wage skills growth. And when we work with businesses, whether it be a company considering an expansion here in Michigan or a client completely new to our market here in the state, one of the first topics they inquire about is talent. And that's been a trend for a number of years, and that trend is certainly not going away anytime soon. Expansion and relocation decisions, they're driven by a number of factors, but talent continues to be one of the primary reasons why a company chooses to locate in a specific community or region. And as such, we must ensure that residents in Michigan have access to career pathways that will lead to a high wage skills growth. This is perhaps the most complicated yet impactful strategic focus area, as it demands the commitment from stakeholders across all levels of government in order to move the needle. Also, partnerships with the private sector and our educational partners are key in fostering high wage skills growth. Not only will we be able to attract and retain talent by fostering high wage skills growth and working to support businesses in our state, but innovative placemaking and developing attractive places to live, work, and play is a key component of our strategic plan. And of course, no economic development strategic plan would be complete without a commitment to strengthening the entrepreneurial ecosystem to help with commercialization and new business creation. We continue to partner with providers of startup support assistance like incubators and smart zones across the state to increase program awareness and the understanding of available resources, with the ultimate goal of more products commercialized here in Michigan, more innovative business startups here in Michigan, and follow-on funding for those startups as well. And lastly, promoting Michigan's image as a world-class destination for business and travel will remain one of our key strategic focus areas. Of course, we accomplish this through the constant evolution of our Pure Michigan campaign, best known for tourism, but the campaign itself has also shown to improve the perception of Michigan for both businesses and job seekers. Throughout the presentation thus far, you may have heard me reference target industries or focus industries on several occasions. And as you can see on the screen, we have 6 focus industries highlighted in the strategic plan: mobility and automotive manufacturing, advanced manufacturing, engineering, design and development, medical device technology, tech, and professional and corporate services. We also recognize that each region in the state may not have a significant concentration of these focus industries, and instead may have more of a focus on regional impact industries like agribusiness, tourism, logistics, financial services, and other manufacturing. As part of our research on the strategic plan, we worked to identify these industry verticals where the state has a distinct competitive advantage, the best opportunity to secure jobs and investment for either expansion or attraction projects, and also ensures long-term resiliency of our economy. The regional impact industries will also continue to play a vital role in creating jobs and energizing communities throughout the state, and we will continue to partner in these efforts alongside local economic development organizations and workforce development to grow and retain business within these industries. Now, while some of our 5-year targets are still under development, as you can see there on the screen, we recognize the important work in front of us that is being led first and foremost by our guiding principles. And we've identified a series of goals and initiatives to ensure that our work day in and day out is focused on success. So what does that look like for us exactly? Well, for our sustainable long-term growth guiding principle, we continue focusing on increasing the number of jobs created by our private sector partners within the 6 focus industries, alongside tracking the total number of jobs supported by our business and community development programs over the next 5 years. And as you can see, the comparison to our baseline numbers from 2015 to 2019 provides some context. We certainly have our work cut out for us, but these goals are achievable and will help move the needle in the right direction. For regional impact, as I mentioned earlier, we have seen an uneven distribution of economic development programs and incentives over the years, which is why we have a renewed focus on providing assistance to disadvantaged areas, as well as partnering more closely with local economic developers and workforce development partners to help bring in projects based on their ongoing collaborations with the private sector. So our workforce development partners within the Michigan Work System, they're going to be key alongside our local economic development partners in helping us identify potential expansion and growth opportunities for businesses that may need additional assistance either through the state or local economic development partners in order to secure jobs and investment here in Michigan. In order to achieve equitable high-wage growth, we will continue to provide assistance to diverse businesses in the state, along with developing targets around pathway jobs, which Carl will touch on here momentarily. And finally, with a customer-centric focus at the heart of what we do every single day, we must remain committed to improving our customer satisfaction whenever we engage with clients, and also find ways to create champions of our economic development resources. Now, the 5-year strategic plan was carefully developed over the course of several months with input from internal staff, partners, consultants, benchmarking on best practices from around the economic development landscape. But it was also developed prior to the world being turned upside down by COVID-19. And I'd like to take a quick moment and recognize that while the strategic plan is a useful guide to long-term economic resiliency in Michigan and will stand up in the face of economic conditions that we are currently experiencing, like most everyone else in economic and workforce development, we did a complete 180 back in March to begin responding to the economic crisis caused by the pandemic. And since March, the MEDC has launched 19 response programs. We've helped support over 3,500 companies through these 19 programs in all 83 counties of the state. And that's also helped retain over 15,400 jobs in the process. Additionally, through our Pure Michigan Business Connect virtual procurement platform, we have helped procure over 1.2 million individual pieces of personal protective equipment for Michigan companies, nonprofits, and healthcare providers. And you can learn more about our ongoing response efforts at michiganbusiness.org/COVID-19 response. And with that, I will turn it over to Carl Dean to walk through our ideal project characteristics for working with clients. But first, I will open it up for any questions on our new 5-year strategic plan that the audience may have. All right, Carl, take it away.
Okay, thanks, Ryan, for a very great overview of the strategic plan. And again, thank you everyone for joining us today. So you want to go next slide, Ryan? So I'm going to talk about the project characteristics and factors that we are considering in projects as we go forward. So as we know, any strategic plan is only as good as the implementation and how we integrate it into the work that we do every day. And so we've been very careful in looking at the plan and how we're going to apply it to our business development projects, which is the largest majority of activity that we do on the business development side, is assisting companies with business expansion opportunities and attracting new businesses. And then how are we going to make sure that the outcomes of those projects really have the intended impacts that we want to see through our strategic plan? So we've undergone a process in this year, which is the first year of our 5-year plan, and we've used the first year as our opportunity to develop our full implementation. And by October this year, we will be in the full implementation mode then. And so when we look at projects, we have really said, let's look at come at our projects with the mindset of who is going to benefit, how are they going to benefit, and how are we going to ensure that benefit takes place. So we're really taking a deeper dive into how we support projects, how we work with the companies, as well as our other partners, to make sure that our strategies on those projects can have the better income or better outcomes than we've previously been having. Not to say that how we've been doing it is wrong. This is really an evolution to get better at what we do together with our partners. So when we look at projects, and we're really going to break this down into essentially 3 areas of information that we're looking at. And much of this is, some of this is information we have looked at on our projects already. But there will be some areas I'll be hitting on that really is a greater emphasis than you perhaps have seen if you've worked with us on a project. So there are 3 areas. One is customer company considerations. We also look at the state and local and regional implications, as well as strategies and the outcomes with regard to equitable high-wage job growth. So the first one in the customer company considerations. As Ryan mentioned earlier, we have identified through research with the Brookings Institute and the McKinsey, our research indicated there are certain industries in Michigan that can better perform than others and are better bets for us in which to invest for long-term sustainable growth and resiliency to downturns and all those other factors. And so we have identified those industries for that reason. As well as it is not a one-size-fits-all. We recognize that there are industries and sectors that have a greater emphasis or importance in regions around the state, and we want to make sure we reflect that in how we support our regional partners to make sure those projects happen as well. We also know that there may be project opportunities that may not fit clearly into either category of focus industry or regional impact. And because of that, we also want to see if there are good opportunities for Michigan. We'll certainly look at projects that can demonstrate similar characteristics to those other sectors that are good for Michigan, that have to do with how they utilize or lead with technology and innovation. Are they resilient to recessions, or do they have other special importance to the state economy? And that may be through, are they an important supply chain a company that is part of an important sector in Michigan? So is it filling a gap? And so those are questions that we'll ask to understand the company better when we're looking at projects. And then we value the diverse business ownership in Michigan and want to see our diversity within Michigan continue to grow. So next slide. So now we look at the state and local and regional considerations, as well as the community impact. One of the things we are now looking at is whether the project is located in a geographically disadvantaged area. These are defined by the governor's order that have to do with different designations around the state. We have developed a map on our website, as well as within Salesforce, where we can put in, or our partners can put in an address of a location and determine if it is inside a geographically disadvantaged area in Michigan. If it is not, we also want to know where a project will occur in relation to geographically disadvantaged areas, because we know if a project is outside, it may still draw a workforce that is largely coming from residents in geographically disadvantaged areas. So we are tracking, it is a metric that we track for investments in the disadvantaged areas, but we also, from a practical standpoint, we do want to know the impacts of a project. Research indicates that when you invest in disadvantaged areas, the return on investment is greater than if you are investing in areas that aren't disadvantaged or experience in economic conditions, difficult economic conditions. So we believe that when we do, we can see a different return on our investment for impacting people that need the help the most in our state. We also have a number of programs that still have eligible distressed community as a criteria, so that is a factor that we consider for project location. We also want to know if when a project is located in a rural area, because we know rural areas and projects and companies located in those areas have a unique set of needs. And so that is going to guide our strategy, perhaps differently in how we look at a project and how we assist that project, and what type of partners we bring together on that project. We also continue to value the reuse of property and brownfield sites in Michigan. We are not focusing or prioritizing those, but we do have a unique set of tools and approaches, as well as the outcomes can be different for a project when we know we're reusing or using a site that is in a brownfield situation. Readiness of infrastructure in the community, not only utilities and things like broadband, water, sewer, roads. We want to make sure the community can support the project, or that the company is going to be successful with adequate infrastructure. We also want to look at things like housing. Is it adequate to attract the workforce that they're planning to attract? Transportation, not only roads for the company and employees, and delivery of commercial and industrial transportation, but also public transit and access for workers. And we're certainly not holding it against areas that are not served by public transportation, but oftentimes public transit can be part of our strategy for workforce development, and making sure that the company and our partners are aware of that, and making sure that we're utilizing that as part of our strategy or pitch for bringing projects to Michigan. And then, are the community services adequate? And then those can be local as well as regional services and partners in the community. This is particularly important when we have very large projects. When you look at something like housing, if we're planning to bring 400 jobs to a community, that's a pretty large number. And is it realistic to expect that project can be accommodated? Or if we're concerned that it is, very early on, we want to bring our community development partners or others within the state or local governments to see what type of strategies can we put together to leverage this project, and maybe be working on solutions as the project is getting ready to occur, rather than waiting till after the company is located in that community. We continue to look at jobs, job numbers, wages, and capital investment in all of our projects, as we have in the past. But we also want to look very closely at those numbers in relation to the size of the community. A 100-job project in Southeast Michigan does not have the same economic impact as a 100-job project in Northern Michigan, for example, or the UP. So it's important for us to factor that into our evaluation and how we invest incentives or other support and have strategies for a project. So we also use a regional impact model called REMI for evaluating the direct or indirect ROI on projects, including spin-off jobs and other impacts to the community and state. And we continue to use that, but we are tweaking it to essentially apply some of the new things that we're using for looking at projects. So we're now going to go to the next slide and focus on high wage growth and pathway considerations for those people that are taking the jobs. And this is really the area where I think those of you that work with the MEDC, our business development managers, and local communities on projects, I think this is where you're going to see the biggest change or additional effort on our part in how we look at projects and where we're putting our investments as a result of a strategy on this component of jobs. So before we talk about the specifics on how we implement it into each project, I just want to spend a minute here to talk about how we categorize jobs when we look at a project. So we've done considerable research, has already been done by the Brookings Institute, which talks about good and promising jobs, and that the focus in economic development ought to be on good and promising jobs. And we basically use a little bit different terminology than the Brookings Institute to talk about targeted jobs that would meet a certain definition and pathway jobs that would be also considered promising jobs. So targeted and pathway jobs. A targeted job would pay above the ALICE threshold for a livable wage benchmark that we've established by county, and would also provide employer-provided health care. So we have worked with the Brookings Institute to establish a wage level for each of the counties around Michigan, whereby we didn't establish a wage where everybody would be out of poverty at this wage. It's just not practical, depending on the household size that would dictate that benchmark. But we wanted to have a wage that allows us to not only look at what are the wages of a project, but how will those wages impact the livability for people taking those jobs, and what can we do to give them a path forward. So the wage that was selected is basically, in each county, what would be the wage by which we would elevate 50% of households with children, where if that wage were secured, we would raise those 50% households above the ALICE wage thresholds of livability. So if a job pays above that wage and has health care, that would be considered a targeted job, and that would be the targeted category. If the job pays below that benchmark wage, but also has employer-provided health care and has a demonstrated pathway to a higher wage above that threshold in 5 years, we would consider that a pathway job. And there are a couple of ways that we would consider a pathway. It might be that there are statistically certain sectors, and we can look at those sectors and determine the percentage of jobs that typically that are considered pathway jobs. We will also look at the company's training plan and their advancement plan for employees, and the opportunities that those workers have to move up into higher wage positions. And so we'll be looking at those a little bit more in depth in the next slide. The other category is, the third category is other jobs. Those would be jobs that pay below the benchmark and will not provide a pathway or foreseeable pathway, or don't have a demonstrated pathway by the company or by the sector that they're in, and or does not provide health care. And this would drop a project down to that. These are still meaningful jobs to many people that take them, but they're jobs that if a person were to take that job, it is not going to lead to them getting out of the situation where they're not meeting their basic needs over a 5-year period or less. And so those are the jobs we're least likely to invest in. We may have projects that have some of those, and we would still invest in the project, but we're really focusing our efforts on how can we create more targeted and pathway jobs. So let's go to the next slide. I'm going to take a quick pause there just to see if anybody has any questions on that specifically before I discuss how we're going to implement the high growth and pathway jobs. Okay, so when we review a project, many of you that work with us know that we have companies submit project information through our Salesforce portal. And from that, we have updated information that we're now getting more in-depth information from our companies that can help us determine those pathways and determine if the jobs are either pathway, they're targeted jobs, or if they are other jobs based upon wage, healthcare, all those. So we will undergo a process to determine if a company is creating 100 jobs, how many are above that targeted wage threshold? Do they provide healthcare? And we're asking some in-depth questions like what's the employee's share of healthcare, and determine if it's a reasonable share and if it can truly be considered a benefit. Because an employee that's making entry-level wages but is asked to pay for 50% of their healthcare premium, that might not be a reasonable benefit to be considered as a benefit. We also are looking into asking companies to really show us and articulate what are their career pathway programs that they have within their company, especially looking at for people that are in the what might be wages below the targeted wage level. What are those pathways that they have over the next 2 to 5 years to move up, and what type of training will be offered to them? Will there be apprenticeship programs that we know have value, not only to the company and the skills that they require, but have value in the economy if that employee wants to move up elsewhere outside of this company? Will there be specific industry skills training, certifications perhaps, or other things that would give upward mobility within the company, or again, in the economy for that employee? We also want to know to what extent the companies are working with our partners in workforce and education, including our Michigan Works partners, community colleges, other nonprofits that may provide services to the employees, or other services in the community. Many of our companies may not be aware of those, so this is an opportunity for us to understand what they know, but also if they're concerned about workforce development and have are having struggles, yet they're not using the services that we have available. That's something we want to make sure that we work together with them to develop those strategies. So one of the things that this is going to enable us to do is, I think that you'll see MEDC, doing on a more regular basis is, when we have this information from companies, we'll be able to develop better strategies to understand how they're advancing their employees. Incentives in the future may be based on job creation, but they also might be based upon specific training activities or certification or credential programs that a company is planning to do. This will help us ensure that we have very specific outcomes, where if a company commits to 25 certifications over a 2-year period, we know we're investing in employees that are going to have a higher wage and a higher skill level when they come out of that training. And so that might be a milestone or a requirement of the company, is to have a certain number of completions in exchange for the incentives that we're providing. And so this is going to give us an ability to get much more creative in how we do incentives, and much more deliberate in ensuring the outcomes that are intended. So I'll take a pause there, and actually, let's go to the next slide. Ryan, do you want to talk about how we work together and how we'll work together, and then we'll have Q&A.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Carl. Great overview there of some of the ideal project characteristics and the evaluation criteria. Of course, we have ongoing collaboration with both the Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity and the Michigan Works offices. I know Carl and I are both on a monthly breakfast club meeting, as we call it, with Luann and a few other folks, both from Michigan Works and from other various state agencies, just to keep up to date on everything workforce and economic development. On that group, there's representation from the Department of Transportation. There's representation from the Department of Education, MDOC as well, and some of their training programs they have for the prison population, for those folks that are potentially being returned back to the civilian population at some point, and giving them a leg up on finding a job as quickly and effectively as possible. So that's always great. Brainstorming, good discussion, Nice to catch up with that group of folks every month that Carl and I join in on. Hashtag collaboration, hashtag breakfast from Luann in the chat. Thanks, Luann. And then I do attend the monthly Michigan Works Directors Council meetings as well, just to provide any updates from the MEDC. I think the theme over the last 6 months is providing an update on some of the programs that we've rolled out from the MEDC, like our Small Business Restart grants, some of our Main Street initiatives for the retail and the restaurant industries, especially as they've been significantly and negatively impacted by COVID-19. But hopefully sooner rather than later, we'll get back to a sense of a new normal in continuing to execute on our 5-year strategic plan. And of course, the partnerships that we've built up and maintained and improved upon through both the Breakfast Club meetings and with the Michigan Works Directors Council will help us achieve our goals. And at the same time, we can help you achieve your goals out in workforce development as well. Carl, any collaborations that you want to mention today before we open it up for Q&A?
Yeah, I would just say, I think two of the areas where we work on an ongoing basis, or say day-to-day basis, are when we have attraction projects that are new companies considering coming to Michigan, and then retention and expansion projects. And even through both of those, essentially, MEDC works through our business development managers that are positioned around the state in each region. And if those of you that have worked with them are on the call, thank you for working with them and making their jobs easier. And that's typically how we work with our Michigan Works partners at the local and at the regional level. There are times that we work together, as Ryan said, at the state level or on key initiatives, and that work will continue to be ongoing. But safest place, if you're ever not sure, is always work through your business development manager in the region. If you have an opportunity or something that you'd want us to engage in, and that would be the best route and the route we continue. So yeah, I think we're at a point where we can open up for questions.
Maybe a question for Luann or others in the audience, if they would like to chime in. Is there anything that we from the MEDC can do to help support your efforts at the Michigan Works and workforce development level, whether that's an immediate need or something more long-term strategic that we can assist with?
So, excuse me. Seeing no questions, I thought I would pop back in. And I want to talk about attraction, retention, tools in the toolbox, and us working together. What do you see as being, you talked about us coming together at breakfast. You talked about us coming together with the Directors Council, and that relationship building and that strengthening. Familiarity breeds trust. What do you see as the couple of top 1, 2, 3 things that we can do to make sure that we continue to build those relationships so that we can work together for prosperity in each of our regions? Mm-hmm.
I'll take a first stab at answering that question. It's a great question, Luann. I think Carl talked about it very briefly during his closing comments about ongoing collaboration amongst the Michigan Works field staff and our business development managers. I think that's the best way for us to remain engaged and stay up to date on any timely topics or issues as they come up, especially with regards to any business retention issues. Talent continues to be the #1 priority for many businesses, whether it's good times and they're not able to find the talent, or it's relatively harsh economic times like we're experiencing now, where companies are still having difficulty finding the talent, but then there's also the issues on the horizon that we're seeing about the need to upskill individuals and provide training. And on the training front as well, obviously we don't have much of a budget update today. The governor's office and the legislature did reach some type of budget agreement in the last couple of days, and we will learn more details on that in the future. But we are very supportive of any ongoing or further negotiations around Skilled Trades Training Fund or Going Pro Talent Fund, any type of initiative or legislation that's geared specifically toward training. And I know the Michigan Works offices have done a phenomenal job over the last 4 or 5 years since the implementation of the Skilled Trades Training Fund and then the transition to the Going Pro Talent Fund. That's been a huge opportunity for us to remain engaged, both with Michigan Works and with the business clientele that taps into those types of programs. So whether it's the Going Pro Talent Fund or some other type of initiative that's funded through the legislature in the future, we'll remain supportive of and look to collaborate with Michigan Works folks on those types of training opportunities for our businesses.
Okay, I see we have a couple of questions in the chat. One from Shamar. I'd like to see MEDC and MWs work closely on Industry 4.0 from an asset standpoint. How do we do this with purpose as it continues to affect all industries? I think that's a great question, Shamar.
Yeah, great question. We've been talking about how we can influence this for much of this past year. We've talked to a number of partners of our technology development partners around the state to look at the need and demand for this and how we would implement this. And we're in those stages of raising the level of this in our strategic plan. We really need to make sure that our companies have the resources to be able to participate and not fall behind in regard to this, but we also have workforce needs. And so those are both really on our radar. I really can't get into specifics because we're in the early stages. And much of the implementation will not necessarily be MEDC because we have expertise around the state and some private partners that have greater expertise than we do, but we will have a facilitating role. And but definitely be on the lookout for that. And I think definitely see Michigan Works associations around the state being big, important partners in that. Hope that answers your question.
Fantastic.
And just to follow up on Carl's comment,
go ahead.
I think the role that Michigan Works has done so well over the years, whether it's Going Pro Talent Fund or a number of other initiatives, led at the local level or the state level, is tapping into the consortiums of employers. It's often the Michigan Works agencies across the state that know not just one or two employers, but really a group of employers that can come together around a particular training opportunity or just best practices and developing those out. So I do see that as a huge opportunity, especially for Industry 4.0, because there is so much unknown right now around Industry 4.0. We know that it's going to be impactful. We know that it's trending in that direction, and COVID-19 has exacerbated that trend. And so I do think it's going to be a key part of Industry 4.0, not just from how does it impact businesses and what can Michigan do to position itself to both attract and provide tools for business expansion here in the state. But then once those companies do expand, or when they do look to expand, what other resources are available to help that workforce train up on Industry 4.0 and automation.
Well, and having that close relationship, so as things are coming up and we're moving forward, it kind of goes into the next question. Is MEDC working with apprenticeships as well to develop the talent you see needed in these growing industries? So rather than building a duplicative system, understanding what your partners are doing and working all together around that to support and move that forward is going to be very critical. So can you talk a little bit about apprenticeships, tools in the toolbox, where you are with it, and how you support it?
Yeah, we won't be developing any apprenticeship programs. That's outside of our lane, I think. But where we will is to be advocates for it, and where we know in regions that these programs exist, we want to make sure our companies are linked with those entities that are providing those apprenticeship programs. So we're certainly promoting them. And going back to what I discussed about some of our incentives, so if we know a project is really hinging upon the workforce development aspects and the outcomes of the project can be enhanced, we may potentially invest in an apprenticeship program with our incentives rather than have a general milestone or milestone or performance requirements. We might specifically invest and make sure those incentives go into supporting an apprenticeship program that can link those applicants, people that will be filling the jobs, with the company's plans for creating apprenticeship programs. So great question.
Great. Okay, I'm just in here trying to type something up and I keep spelling the wrong. So I'm just like, whatever, let it go, Lou, let it go.
Know what you
Spelling
mean.
matters, so thank you. Anahita, as we prepare the talent pipeline, how do we in the field learn about companies in our communities that may have been identified by MEDC providing targeted pathways and jobs? So that's great. How are we getting that communication link?
Yeah,
There's probably.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Ryan.
Oh, okay. I think the best way to communicate and identify, what companies within your community or region have been identified. We're not necessarily going through the list of companies that we work with to say this company provides targeted pathway jobs, this company does not, unless that information is, given to us through the normal course of business when we do business retention visits with those companies. And also if we're working with a company just looking at an expansion or an attraction project in Michigan, that is one of the questions that we are asking is, around specifically targeted or pathway jobs. When it comes to either, visits, just normal everyday intel that we gained from those retention visits, or if it's working on an economic development project, I think the best way to stay in the loop and in the know on those companies is to continue and maintain that relationship with your business development manager. The Michigan Works offices should be the go-to for those business development managers when it comes to anything workforce development and training related. And so if that's a relationship, Anahita, that you're looking to improve upon or help create, please let us know and we can make sure that you have the appropriate contact within your territory in the state on our business development team. And if you already have that contact and that relationship, just continue maintaining. I would certainly encourage, and I encourage everybody on my team to at least have a monthly, if not ideally, maybe even a biweekly check-in with their Michigan Works offices, just because we have so many companies to serve throughout the state in our individual territories. There's so much going on, especially right now as companies are struggling to get by and others are creating jobs, others are losing jobs. There's just so much activity right now that I think it's even more important that we stay as engaged and as informed as possible.
I would add that all of the regions.
Go ahead.
I would add that all of the regions also typically have monthly regional meetings where the local economic developers and county economic developers all convene on a monthly basis. And I know a lot of Michigan Works offices participate in those. For those that aren't, that's a great place to stay engaged with all the local partners. The business development managers from MEDC participate in those, attend those, and oftentimes you'll have updates of what companies are expanding, who's doing what in each community. So those are great ways to stay connected as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, we still have a few minutes if anybody has any final questions. And if not, then I guess we'll have a little bit of extra time to visit exhibitors, kind of chat with each other. Seriously, if you haven't done that video chat one-on-one, just try to call somebody up, and it's kind of nice, excuse me, to connect with people that you typically see in the hallways. So we will be back here at, I believe it's 11:30 for our general session. Yes, it's 11:30. And I will once again post the survey link in so that you can make sure that you give us some information and some feedback on this session. We always appreciate hearing from you. We very much value your input. And the contact information for both Ryan and Carl is right there. And if you ever need anything, you can always reach to the association and we can go forward from there. So Ryan and Carl, final comments?
I'll say what I heard right at the beginning of the pandemic. Somebody say on one of these Zoom calls, they said, stay informed, stay engaged, and stay encouraged. I think that's the best word of advice or piece of advice that I've been given throughout this whole thing. And I think it goes both pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, post-pandemic, but just stay engaged, stay in contact. Let us know what we can do for you all out in the field. And also we'll continue to remain in contact, Luann, through the Directors Council and our Breakfast Club meetings, sharing best practices and other information that's relevant for the Michigan Works offices across the state. And thank you everybody for joining today's session.
Yeah, thank you. Contact us
Thank you.
anytime if you have follow-up questions that you didn't think to ask today, or you want to work together on a project, or just share strategy or insight. We really appreciate it. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you so much for taking the time to join us, and everybody have a great day. We'll see you back here at 11:30.